Rat Pack member Dean Martin has gone down in history as one of the most consistent luminaries of Hollywood's golden age. Because of this, it may shock some viewers to learn Dean arguably could have stayed with us for longer than he did. Join Factsverse as we explore why Dean Martin said no to life-saving surgery. Dean Martin rose to prominence as the king of cool in Hollywood, and there were few bigger celebrities during the golden age. Dean certainly knew how to keep his cool, and he also knew how to keep a secret. The entertainer was a man of mystery, and there are many things that it still surprises fans to learn about him. For one thing, did you know Dean Martin wasn't his real name? He was born Dino Paul Cressetti. During the early days of his career, he changed his name to Dino Martini. It was a band leader named Sammy Watkins who allegedly came up with the name Dean Martin. Martin became known to the world by his famous stage name in 1940, and he took it by storm. However, before becoming an entertainer, Dean flirted with becoming a boxer. Under the name Kid Crochet, he apparently fought a dozen professional fights before becoming better known in Hollywood. Out of that dozen, Dean claimed he won 11. He began boxing at age 16 and was considered a welterweight. There were numerous reasons why he decided to give up that pursuit. For one, he felt the sport didn't pay well enough. For another, he found himself routinely getting injured. Dean was said to have broken his nose multiple times during his boxing days, and some blame these injuries for the nose job that he underwent later in life. During his boxing days, Dean lived in New York City and shared an apartment with future professional wrestler Sonny King. According to legend, the two figures would invite people over to their apartment to watch them fight. People paid good money to watch Dean and Sonny fight in the apartment. They would bare-knuckle box until one was knocked out. Surprisingly, the person who was knocked out was typically Sonny King. Dean was a man of many surprises. Another thing that might surprise fans to learn about Dean Martin is the fact that the beloved actor and crooner adored comic books. When it came to reading in general, Dean wasn't the biggest fan. According to him, the only legitimate book he'd ever read was Sleeping Beauty, but comic books were a different story. He loved the comic books so much he was a little ashamed of it. Apparently, during the time he was working with comedian Jerry Lewis, the crooner would coax his friend to go to the store and buy comic books for him so he wasn't caught in the act. In the 1950s, DC Comics brought the iconic comedic duo of Martin and Lewis into the medium of comic books with the adventure of Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. The comic book series ran for 40 issues, and the only reason it ended was that Dean and Jerry decided to end their partnership. After that, the comic book continued being published for a time, with Jerry Lewis as the sole main character. The Adventures of Jerry Lewis ran for a total of 83 more issues. Dean was a man aware of the fact that his public persona and true self were always going to be two different things. He exploited this often to his advantage, which is a big part of how he came to be known as the King of Cool. Dean knew exactly what image to project to win a crowd over, and one of the best tricks that he had up his sleeve was his persona as a lovable drunk. Dean rarely ever showed up on stage without a drink in his hand, and the audience always assumed that what was in his cup was alcohol. Dean played along, though the truth was, he was always a responsible drinker. He took his fake image as a drunk so seriously, he even got a vanity license plate that said the word drunkie. It's been said that Dean was inspired to portray himself as a lovable drunk to the crowd by one of his influences, Joe E. Lewis. Was Dean Martin really a lovable drunk? Dean loved to portray himself as a drunkard, but the truth was he preferred to eschew late nights partying so he could go to bed early and get up on time to play golf. Alcohol may not have been one of Dean's great loves, but golfing certainly was. It's been said that he loved it so much he would often ditch rehearsals for his variety show so he could get back out on the course. In fact, when the Dean Martin show became a massive hit and it was time for Dean to renew his contract, he had a stipulation worked in where it was explicitly stated he didn't need to show up to rehearsals ever again. Another surprising fact about Dean is the fact that he was deathly afraid of elevators. This came as a result of claustrophobia. Dean hated all closed spaces, but elevators became a major problem due to how much he traveled. There were many instances over the course of his career where he was forced to come face to face with an elevator, and he always decided on the stairs instead. This fear resulted in another unique contractual stipulation, this time stating that all of his hotel rooms had to be on the first floor. At age 27, he underwent elective surgery. There have been various guesses as to why he decided to get a nose job. Some say it was because of his boxing injuries, while others believe it was simply because he never liked the way he looked. It was comedic performer Lou Costello who paid for the surgery, and the result was so subtle many didn't even notice the difference. But despite undergoing surgery willingly, there was a time later in his life when he would actually require surgery, and he refused it. Dean Martin refused life-saving surgery. Towards the end of his life, Dean started quickly succumbing to years and years of chain smoking. He allegedly started up the habit during his teen years and didn't give it up until he was at death's door. He didn't quit smoking until 1993 at age 76. The reason he quit was he'd been diagnosed with cancer. Sadly, this effort was too little too late for the beloved actor, comedian, and crooner. He died a few years later. As Dean's cancer was getting worse, doctors told him there might be a way for him to significantly extend his life. They told him there was a chance that if he underwent surgery on both kidneys and his liver, there was a good chance he'd be able to beat the cancer. Shockingly, Dean refused. Because of this, he ended up dying sooner than later. It was the early part of 1995 when he stopped making public appearances. By the end of the year, he was no longer with us. He passed away from acute respiratory failure on Christmas Day. If Dean's death wasn't tragic enough, the entertainer also had to suffer through the loss of one of his children. This child was Dean Paul Martin, whom Dean had during his second marriage. Dean Paul was an aviator who was so passionate about flying that he got his pilot's license at age 16. In the 1980s, he began working with the California Air National Guard. It was during this time working professionally as a pilot that he passed away. In the spring of 1987, he was in the middle of a routine training mission when something was severely wrong. An unexpected snowstorm blew in, and this caused Dean Paul to crash into a nearby mountain, killing him. Now it's time to hear from you. Did you know Dean Martin refused to undergo surgery that could have potentially extended his life? Let us know in the comments section below.